The delayed 2020 Tokyo Olympics have gotten underway with a modest opening ceremony reflecting the impact of the pandemic. The stadium was almost empty and the show included a moment of silence to honor COVID victims. Tennis star Naomi Osaka lit the Olympic cauldron, marking the official start of the 32nd Olympiad. The message from the man in charge of the International Olympic Committee was that this is a day of hope. The US has launched a number of airstrikes in Afghanistan against Taliban positions in recent days, despite having withdrawn 95% of its forces from the country. The price of coffee bean futures has soared by around 25% in the past week after a rare frost hit Brazil's main coffee growing region. Traders say there's damage to an estimated 10% of Brazil's coffee trees.
Opening ceremonies for the delayed 2020 Tokyo Olympics begin without visitors, but outside the stadium, protesters call for the Games' cancellation over COVID-19. China's President Xi Jinping made a rare visit to Tibet Autonomous Region. She reportedly asked local Buddhists to work towards identifying with Chinese people, culture, and the party. In South Korea, a top U.S. diplomat expresses sympathy for North Koreans facing hunger because of coronavirus restrictions. And African countries are to start receiving a total of 400 million Johnson & Johnson single-injection vaccines for COVID-19.
Let's start with you. You've been talking about, since you've been there, how quiet it's been, but watching you this morning on GMA and watching your live shot here, it's not so quiet, but it's not spectators cheering that we're hearing there in Tokyo.
That's right, TJ. Things got loud today. They've been loud all throughout the night. Yes, the games have officially finally kicked off, but not without controversy. Earlier this evening, as the opening ceremonies were pushing on inside the Olympic Stadium here behind me, we heard loud and clear protesters gathering, shouting outside, demanding that these games be canceled. After a year-long delay, the Olympics opening ceremony, a markedly different show from all previous opening ceremonies, moving forward in the midst of a pandemic. Instead of a stadium packed with family and fans, spectators have been banned from the 68,000-seat arena. The only crowd allowed inside? About 950 people, including government officials, VIPs, and foreign dignitaries. The global pandemic remaining a looming cloud over the games. Now, at least 110 accredited individuals testing positive. I spoke with the executive director at the International Olympic Committee just hours ago amid ongoing opposition from Japanese citizens. How would you describe how things are going right now?
I'm incredibly confident, and I would say happy to be where we're at this point in time.
Are you happy with the numbers where they are? Are you concerned that they're going to go higher?
It's not so much about the number of cases, but it's how we manage the cases.
Is there a scenario in which these games could be canceled?
There's no scenario in which they can be canceled.
Now, inside that stadium here behind me, only about a third of Team USA's athletes are marching in today's opening ceremonies. A vastly different situation from what we've seen in years past. Obviously, they all have masks on. They are socially distanced. And as we hear these protesters, they're a little quieter now than they've been throughout the night. They are demanding that the health and safety of people here in Tokyo be taken into account. The numbers have been rising by the day. We have 155% more cases of COVID here in Tokyo this week than we did last week. And the big concern is what's going to happen in the days and weeks to come.
But Rose, we talk about the Olympics in the past. They always feel a certain way. They're so celebratory. They're so fun. You have these nations competing, people from all over the world. You talk about how quiet it's been, but there almost feels like a tone now of let's just get through it.
Right. And there is just this feeling of what's next. I think everyone's waiting for the next shoe to drop. There's a lot of concern here, and a lot of people are waiting to see what will happen as we have more athletes still coming in. There are a lot of athletes from the U.S. who haven't even come to Tokyo yet. You're only allowed to come here 5 days before you compete. So there are still more people coming into this city and a lot more concerned about what is yet to come. And yes, not a celebratory tone at all. We were told that what's happening inside is elegant but sober, and that is certainly very different from any other Olympics we've seen.
All right, you have seen a lot of them up close. Rose, it's good to see you. Please continue to be safe over there. We'll talk to you soon, okay?
Thank you. Bye, TJ.
The Olympics opening ceremony finally underway. Take a look right there
Live look at the stadium where after a year-long delay due to this pandemic, the games are finally kicking off in Japan.
That comes amid growing concerns about COVID. Cases in Tokyo hitting a 6-month high. We're already seeing citizens there protesting against the games moving forward. Amy Robach is live at the Olympic Stadium with the latest. Good morning, Amy.
Opening ceremonies got underway a short while ago with fireworks, but not everyone is attending. Simone Biles took to Instagram to say that Team USA Gymnastics did not go to opening ceremonies, in part because of COVID. This all taking place while we still have protesters on the streets of Tokyo demanding that the games be canceled. This morning, after a year-long delay, the Olympics opening ceremony officially underway. A markedly different show from all previous opening ceremonies. Moving forward in the midst of a pandemic, instead of a stadium packed with family and fans, spectators have been banned from the 68,000-seat arena. The only crowd allowed inside? About 950 people, including government officials, VIPs, and foreign dignitaries. And it's not just fans and family who will be watching from home, with athletes required to arrive in Tokyo no more than 5 days before the start of their event, some of them watching from their own living rooms as well, including 3-time world champion track star Quanera Hayes.
It's really bittersweet. I'm just gonna put on my USA gear and, just pretend that I'm there and still, get the experience at home.
Hayes making the trek to Tokyo tomorrow, her very first Olympics. How are you preparing yourself mentally and physically for what you're about to walk into?
I do keep myself in a go-getter mentality, and I'm just like, I'm gonna fight to the end.
The global pandemic remaining a looming cloud over the games. Now, at least 110 accredited individuals testing positive. I spoke with the executive director at the International Olympic Committee just hours ago amid ongoing opposition from Japanese citizens. How would you describe how things are going right now?
I'm incredibly confident, and I would say happy to be where we're at this point in time.
Are you happy with the numbers where they are? Are you concerned that they're going to go higher?
It's not so much about the number of cases, but it's how we manage the cases.
Is there a scenario in which these games could be canceled?
There's no scenario in which they can be canceled.
Now, around 1/3 of Team USA is expected to participate in person with masks on. They'll be socially distanced at this morning's opening ceremony. We know First Lady Jill Biden will be in attendance, along with a handful of government officials from around the world. They will be there as well, Michael.
And Amy, is there any idea how organizers are planning to compensate for a stadium that is not full of spectators?
Yeah, it is quite a challenge, and that IOC official I spoke to earlier says we're going to see, he describes it as an elegant ceremony. He says this is going to hopefully bring the rest of the world inside Tokyo. They're going to use technology to try and adjust for an Olympic Games being held under very unique circumstances. But of course, as you're hearing, and I think you can probably hear the police shouting at this group of protesters that has been growing in numbers along the streets of Tokyo here. They're making their way toward the stadium. They're shouting they're facing off with police. It is certainly an eventful night here, Michael.
Eventful, and as you said, unique circumstances to say the least. Thank you so much, Amy.
About COVID safety at the Games. The USA Gymnastics team has announced it will not be staying in the Olympic Village. James Longman is in Tokyo with a behind-the-scenes look at life inside the bubble. Good morning, James.
Yeah, good morning, George. A big night tonight. Remember, this is just the beginning, and there are already more than 100 cases inside the Olympic bubble. But that phrase, Olympic bubble, suggests that the venues and the village are entirely protected from cases inside Tokyo. And that, from the very beginning, I'm afraid to say, just hasn't been the case, even though officials here are doing their very best to protect them. Now, I went down to see Simone Biles and the other ladies from the US gymnastics team. I have to say it was very strange watching their routine. It was a very kind of clinical environment, very controlled, entirely empty all around. But right down there on the floor alongside the ladies were lots of officials, camera operators, technicians, volunteers, and all of those people, most of them anyway, live in Tokyo. So they're going back and forth between Tokyo and the bubble. So you can see how it's very difficult to differentiate between Tokyo cases and Olympic bubble cases. And over the next few weeks, we'll be watching that case count climb. I think it's fair to say we'll all be seeing just how high it goes.
Yeah,
George.
Will it stay under control? Okay, James, thanks.
We start here in Tokyo, where the opening ceremony of the long-awaited Tokyo Olympics is underway. The Games were postponed by 1 year due to the coronavirus pandemic. Under strict anti-virus measures, more than 11,000 athletes from about 200 countries and territories are streaming in to compete in a record 33 sports. The ceremony started with a performance dedicated to athletes who pushed themselves to the limit despite the pandemic. The athletes wore face masks and were told to keep social distance as they marched. A team made up of refugees is participating in the Summer Games for the second time following Rio de Janeiro. Athletes from Russia are taking part as representatives of the Russian Olympic Committee. That country is banned from sending athletes to major international competitions due to its history of systematic doping. The ceremony and most of the competitions are being held without spectators. The number of officials attending the opening ceremony was reduced to about 950. Japan's emperor will soon officially declare the opening of the Games before the Olympic cauldron is lit. Organizers say over 100 people involved in the Games, including at least 11 athletes, have tested positive in Japan. The competitions will run through August 8th under strict anti-virus measures inside and outside the venues. NHK World's Yamamoto Miki took in all the action around the National Stadium.
Fireworks, procession, fanfare, spectacles. The opening ceremony has it all. But this year is missing one thing that's always been taken for granted, spectators. And that certainly underscores the feeling that this is no ordinary Olympics. There's also protesters on the streets, protesting against holding the Olympics amid a pandemic. You're seeing more police presence. Security has been beefed up. So compared to the serene nature of the stadium, outside the no entry zone, the mood is quite tense. Now, I'd like to go back to the ceremony and explain a bit more. The theme is United by Emotion. Amid the pandemic, the organizers say they want to unite the world with the power of sports. They also say the balance of gender is another focus. During the athletes' procession, all teams were asked to have one male and one female athlete to bear their flags to symbolize gender equality. Now, this Olympics is being held after suffering a year's delay and now opening amid a pandemic that's worsening. So while we watch the athletes compete, we will also be paying attention to another match, the organizers' ongoing fight against the pandemic.
Emperor Naruhito has welcomed foreign dignitaries visiting Japan to attend the opening ceremony of the Tokyo Olympics. French President Emmanuel Macron and U.S. First Lady Jill Biden were among the dozen dignitaries from 11 countries who visited the Imperial Palace on Friday. The emperor addressed the guests in English. He talked about his lasting memory of the closing ceremony of the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, recalling how athletes from different countries paraded together, shoulder to shoulder, not divided by country. He called this the source of his wish for world peace.
I would like to conclude my remarks with the hope that the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games will remind us of the spirit of Olympism, peace and harmony, and that we will relay the torch of that spirit to the future.
Imperial household officials say the emperor later chatted with each of the guests. The event was brief and held without food or drink because of the coronavirus pandemic. Japanese Prime Minister Suga Yoshihide has met with the chief executive of Pfizer to discuss ways to ensure a stable supply of the coronavirus vaccine. Suga met Albert Bourla over breakfast on Friday at the State Guest House in Tokyo. The minister in charge of the vaccine rollout, Kono Taro, was also there. Pfizer has already honored Suga's request in April for an additional 50 million doses. The pharmaceutical giant has also donated vaccines for 40,000 athletes and others involved in the Tokyo Games. Suga